Welcome back to 7th Grade Mustache. On today's episode, we'll be speaking about emergency powers, complete submission under the threat of death, diseases, panic weapons, or panic as a weapon, actually, and government mandates that bypass the democratic discourse. All throughout history, governments have found ways to trick people and coerce the public into thinking that they should give away their freedom at the expense of safety. But it is Ben Franklin who says those who give away their freedom for safety are not worthy of either. The greatest expansion of the government and its control happened during the September 11th attacks. On September the 14th, 2001, President Bush signed Proclamation 7463, giving himself sweeping powers to mobilize the military in the days following the terrorist attacks that crashed planes into the World Trade Center, Pentagon, and a field in Pennsylvania. It allowed him to call up National Guard and reserve troops and hire and fire military officers and bypass limits on the numbers of generals that could serve. President Trump had become the third president to renew a post-9/11 emergency proclamation, stretching what was supposed to be a temporary state of a national emergency after the 2001 terror attacks into its 17th year. And then, on September 11th, 2022, President Biden extended Proclamation 7463. The 9/11 emergency declaration was among other emergencies that President Biden signed. He additionally extended a national emergency about the sectarian violence and human rights abuses in Ethiopia that he declared last year. He also announced the renewal of an emergency declared by his predecessor Trump in 2018 with respect to threat of foreign interference in or undermining public confidence in 2020 U.S. election. Proclamation 7463 and the Patriot Act is how America entered the age of surveillance. It is the greatest violation of personal rights, and it's happened during emergency declarations. So these emergency declarations take away personal rights, and many of them never come back.
We've always had this talk before. Like, if you give up what's important for an emergency, it will always find an emergency for you. There's always an emergency out there. There's always everything from racism, threat of violence, disease. You might get robbed. Somebody might break into your car. And so the way they get you is that it's for the greater good. Like, hey, man, don't you want to participate? Don't you want to do this? And they aren't you for safety? That's how they get you. And of course I'm for safety. But then that kills the whole argument. They don't even want to hear their argument. It's the same way when you talk to any of these like so-called liberals about gun rights, and they're like, "There's no reason for AR." There's several reasons, but you won't let me have the conversation. Then you got Kamala Harris sitting there, like giving a speech, tapping her foot, like, "Anybody got a reason for AR?" But you're not going to let me answer. So there's always a situation that you can create that menace, that bullshit, that, hey, man, we got to worry about Russia. Hey, man, we got to worry about China. Hey, man. And look, the easiest example of that is when they did the concentration camps for the Asian Americans during World War II.
Internment camp.
Internment camps, yes. So we're at war with Japan, and so they gather up all the Japanese, but they also gather up Chinese, they gather up Koreans, and they gathered up anybody who was Asian, even though these are all different countries. And you put them in a concentration camp because of safety, fear of this, fear of that. And look at us now. China, oh, shit, all you got to do is spend enough money, and Bill Clinton let Chinese in the damn White House. So that's the hypocrisy or dichotomy of the whole situation, is that literally you can violate somebody's rights when it's safety, but you're not held accountable. You're not got. Well, I shouldn't say that. Asians do and still do get reparations. They get so many tax-free years and stuff like that. So I guess you guys try to fix it. But yeah, no, the idea that you want to give up your rights for this and they don't give them back, that's what the whole issue is. They very rarely give shit back. You always wonder why these gun lobbyists fight so hard for these guns, and we need common sense gun control. Man, that is just an excuse to take away your weapons, and then once you do it, we can't get them back. That's the checks and balances that are available. Sorry, but yeah, that's bullshit. Don't get wrapped up in that shit.
The Trading with the Enemies Act was used by President FDR Roosevelt and closed the U.S. banks for 4 days. This restricted trading during a national emergency. This became the Emergency Banking Act. It created 12 new Federal Reserve state banks, and it changed the banking structure in the United States. There are 450 laws that Congress developed as a series of laws that regulate presidential emergency powers. The National Emergencies Act of 1976 and the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. These emergency acts can be nullified. They can be ended if Congress can come together with a 2/3 majority vote, or a supermajority vote as it's called, to end the Emergency Act. That's one of the ways it can happen. It can happen that way, or President can choose not to renew it. The earliest example of emergency declarations is in ancient Rome. The power over the Senate was suspended and a dictator was temporarily installed to control laws in times of war and emergencies. The dictator was freed from all constitutional restraints. He was practically free from interference by the Senate and could not be called to account for his official acts on the expiration of his term. There was no appeal from his decision. The last dictator was appointed in 2002 BC. The office was looked upon with some suspicion. In the hand of the conservative Senate, it might easily be used to suppress liberty. The interference of the comitia in the appointment was an attempt to control it in the interest of the popular party, or at least to render it politically innocuous. The freedom from appeal and the tribune's veto are naturally distasteful to the democracy. So, in these times of war and emergency, the Romans handed over the power of the Senate to an appointed dictator, and that a dictator was appointed by the Senate.
No, what was the reason for that? And it's because, like, when you have a Senate, it takes time. This bureaucracy, it takes time to get a vote. But if you're at war, you need immediate action. Mm-hmm. So they'll give it to this guy. Now, didn't they also, during times of war, like, remember when Hannibal was fighting with Rome? So they had two generals, and the generals would literally exchange power. And he would wait for them to exchange power to attack. Or he would, so literally they try to put a checks and balance in there so they wouldn't, lose their freedom. But sometimes that can, backfire.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's the whole point of these emergency act and these presidential powers, is to get things done swiftly without having to vote on it. Now, of course, in the time of war, that does make sense. But there's other times where these presidential powers seem a bit inflated. But there are things that protect people, the laws that can protect citizens in that country.
Yeah. I remember back when Barack was in office, and you were the one that pointed this one out. He was the one who suspended posse comitatus.
That's right.
And posse comitatus was a law that was put in place back in 1800s, 1700s or whatever, where there could never be a army on American land for American people. And it's crazy enough, like I said, the person that suspended that was Barack. And I remember the first time I ever thought I heard anything even remotely close to that, I thought it was before Barack, but it was during Hurricane Katrina and Rita. Remember when Katrina hit, they were looking for help, and they had Mexican federal agents or Mexican federal army on that bridge in New Orleans or Louisiana someplace, and they were literally not letting, they would shoot you if you came across that bridge. And I'm like, I ain't never heard of this shit. And that's when you were like, hey, this motherfucker suspended posse comitatus.
Check it out. The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, signed by President Rutherford B. Hayes, limits the powers of the federal government in the use of federal military personnel to enforce domestic policies within the United States. The law prohibits the use of the armed forces as a posse comitatus to execute the laws except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or an act of Congress. The act was enacted in response to the abuses resulting from the extensive use of the Army in civil law enforcement during the Civil War and the Reconstruction. The act disallows the use of federal troops as police unless Congress overrides it or the use of force is expressly authorized by the Constitution. So there's your posse comitatus. But part of the reason why it was disbanded is because of the NDAA Act that was signed by Obama. Okay, so around that time, you got to understand the context. The Iraq and Afghanistan wars were at their zenith at that point. And so there was a lot of rendition and torture that was going on that had started under the Bush administration. And so what the Obama administration was doing then is it was basically trying to clean up a lot of this reckless wartime governance that was established during the Bush administration because he was a lawyer. And so he was doing this to make sure that, okay, you can't sue the United States government for torturing people and rendition, which is like straight up kidnapping motherfuckers. But what the NDAA Act did was allow Americans under the government's discretion to take away their rights if they're considered a terrorist. So if that person's a terrorist, you no longer have any rights as a citizen. You're an enemy of the state.
All you have to do is be suspected of being a terrorist. Then they were sort of suspending your rights, bugging your home, Patriot Act, Patriot Act, Patriot Act, listen to your call, and that shit gets complicated. And like I said, we know that there are bad guys out there, but there's no oversight. There's no proof. There's no, anything.
Mm-hmm. So, on January 11, 2010, President Obama signed Executive Order 13528. The Executive Order 13528 subverted Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. A White House press release claims that the 10-member bipartisan council was created to strengthen and further the partnership between the federal government and state governments to protect the nation against all types of hazards. Once appointed, according to the White House press release, the council received such matters as involving the National Guard of various states, homeland defense, civil support, synchronization, and integration of state and federal military activities in the United States, and other matters of mutual interest pertaining to the National Guard and Homeland Defense. Okay, so in 2002, U.S. NORTHCOM was created, and it brought the armed forces together to fight the war on terror. But it's this Executive Order 135 subverts Posse Comitatus, which bars the use of military for civilian law enforcement. For the Bush years, they did the same thing. So basically, during Hurricane Katrina, this is what happened. So during the height of the Hurricane Katrina 2005 crisis, Bush tried citing presidential prerogatives for using National Guard troops under the Insurrection Act, a draconian statute that authorizes the president to federalize National Guard units when the state government failed to suppress rebellion. The plight of Katrina victims was twisted, aided, and abetted by complicit corporate media into an act of rebellion. And a new criminal category was concocted to criminalize the traumatized New Orleans residents. So, okay. Right there, that part. I remember watching the news at that time and how it was kind of inflating the crime that was happening. And it was focusing on the crime too much. So there was a lot of like verbiage that was used that was very derogatory. Any black people,
man, that's sick. Yep.
Any black people that were part of this, that in the flood, and they were like fleeing, trying to go somewhere else, they were calling them refugees. And I'm like,
so
whoa, hold up, dog. Those aren't refugees. Those are American citizens.
We can't underplay the crime because we heard what happened in the Superdome. A lot of rampant stuff, a lot of bad stuff. We also heard that prisons opened their doors to let these guys go so they wouldn't die, and these motherfuckers were doing some fucked up shit. But the numbers weren't to the extent where you needed to bring in certain things or you needed to suspend certain rights. Again, suspending rights, and that was how that shit got out of hand. You literally had people, if you cross this bridge, we're gonna shoot you. If you do this, we're gonna shoot you. Now it was bad because you know this in my professional life, I work at a place where that shit was a serious situation, and I had people calling in to me like, hey, duct tape, I need to get off, man. I can't let y'all say, hey, I need to get off. I got alligators in my backyard and I got sharks in my front yard. Dude was on the coast. Alabama, Louisiana, I can't think where else. We don't go to Georgia. So, and he's like, look, I've been working for 21 days straight, and literally, I'm like, okay, I'll give you some time off, give him a week off so he can take care of his stuff. But he was saying that because these bodies were floating, the alligators were eating the bodies, and the sharks in his front yard, because he was on the beachfront, sharks in the front were eating bodies too. So I'm not trying to downplay how bad that situation was. We needed the National Guard, but that's the whole thing, is that that situation was a terrible situation. You know, we get that, but this is what we mean when we say that you will suspend your rights because of fear. Like, okay, cool, you know that they have marauders everywhere, and like I said, there were some very bad people doing very bad shit. We get that.
Yeah, but the number at which it was reported was completely inflated. The same
Inflate, yeah.
way the news media will tell you that there's a protest going on and the city's burning down and it's one little part in the city. And they're using, I'm a cameraman, so they're using very tight camera angles and they're not panning to show the surrounding detritus around there. And I'm like, oh, because there is no detritus outside
It's
of that
12 people. Yeah.
100-foot square area. If they talk about how people were like rioting in Portland, and you go to Portland and you talk to people and they're like, man, that was one little small ass area, but they blew it up like it was the biggest thing in the world, you know?
Like I said, I don't want to downplay this shit, but I remember when COVID first hit, and I'm not going to talk about the jab. When COVID first hit, and people were like, man, have you seen that? So they would show these bodies, these trucks full of bodies in New York. Man, people are dying in New York. Come to find out, like that footage was from Italy, I think. Like I said, I don't want to exaggerate.
And it was from 3 years before.
Yeah. So you know, so you saw these semis with these bodies, unmarked caskets, and
they had hospitals that was supposed to be New York City were actually in Rome.
Yeah, okay. Forgive me. It was Rome, which is still Italy. It was Rome, and I'm like, but again, that's how you scare people into giving up their rights, you know. And we don't need to tell you how this whole thing COVID ended because we were all part of it, but because of that right there, because we were told by the media that, oh my God, people are dying by truckloads, and there's so many, they don't even know what to do with them. Footage was not even from there, but you saw it. You trust these media outlets, and so we were allowed to have ourselves locked in because we didn't want that to happen in our city. That's what happens. You give up rights. I'm trying to think of another situation where the media inflated the situation, and like I said, those guys down there were doing bad shit. But again, the people who are getting shot weren't the criminals. This is the same. Whenever you have that same argument about gun control, we need more laws. The criminals are to follow the laws. When you got 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and 15-year-olds in Chicago with Glocks with Glock switches on them, but you want to come to my house and knock on my door like, hey, you shouldn't be able to have this. You shouldn't be able to have this plastic thing on your gun. Like, wait a minute. Now they are busting these guys for doing this now. I've seen 3 articles recently where people got busted ordering the switches from China and trying to sell them. Like, but
ordering again,
what? The Glock switch. It's called an auto sear, and it goes on the back of your Glock and makes your Glock fully automatic.
Sear as in SEAR?
Yeah, yep, sear. It's called an auto sear. That's correct. And SEAR, I think it's the S on the end.
Sear as in burn?
Yes. Auto sear. Sear is part of the gun, and what this does is actually makes the action automatic, where it skips a motion, it skips a move. And last time I was in Memphis, I was down there for my aunt's funeral, and this guy got busted. He didn't get busted. The shipment got busted. Guess how many this guy ordered? Just some crazy number. He got busted, or the shipment got stopped. He ordered 500 of these. That's how you got caught. You're not a criminal mastermind. But 500 of these auto sears were ordered. So why are you not going after these guys right here, but instead you want to make laws for regular American citizens? That's the whole problem. It makes no sense. But that's to say, like I said, this is the sensationalism of media. I remember we were in high school, and there's a big article about this newscaster in Florida. I think I want to say Tampa, St. Petersburg. Please forgive me. It's been 25, 30 years. But she was trying to do an article on dogfighting, and she couldn't find a dogfight. So what did she do? She staged one. She got arrested. She got that federal time because she couldn't find. But that was the thing. They were trying to give the impression that dogfighting is so bad, it's all over the place, it's rampant. She couldn't even find a dogfight. So she had to stage one. That's when the media starts staging events so that you'll side with the media or take their point of view. That's corruption. That's no different than a cop planting evidence. That's fucked up.
So I want to talk about the NDAA Act one more time. So on December 31st, 2011, President Obama signed the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which codifies indefinite military detention without charge or trial into law for the first time in American history. The act authorizes $662 billion in funding, among other things, for defense of the United States and its interests abroad. The NDAA's dangerous detention provisions would authorize the president and all future presidents to order the military to pick up and indefinitely imprison people captured anywhere in the world far from any battlefield. So, in 2011, his executive order subverted posse comitatus. And then, later on that year, at the end of the year, he signed this NDAA Act, which allows the military, which is now allowed on U.S. soil, to snatch people up and put them in military prisons. So you're not going to a state prison. You're going to a military prison where Kansas, you cannot be found.
Yeah, Leavenworth, Kansas.
Or a black site until they figure out what they're going to do with you. So
what's the other one that they keep, like Guantanamo Bay?
Guantanamo Bay.
Guam. Like literally.
Abu Ghraib. Fucking yeah.
Yeah. You literally don't. You got like a court-appointed lawyer, and that motherfucker comes sees you. Like you can't call that motherfucker. He just shows up like, hey, well, let's talk about your trial. Then he walks off.
Did you ever see that movie called The Mauritanian?
No, I didn't. I do know, but no, I have not seen that.
It's similar to what we're talking about. So. There's a movie about this also. It's called Rendition, which has Jake Gyllenhaal and some other well-known actors in it. Reese Witherspoon, she's in it too. Yeah, it's called Rendition. Check that shit out. So, a presidential policy directive entitled The Requirements of the National Defense Authorization Act regarding procedures for implementing 1022 of the NDAA was issued on February 28, 2012 by the White House. The directive provides specific guidance as to the scope of procedures and standard for covered persons determinations. So if you want to figure out if you fall into this category or what the criteria is, you want to look up the scope of procedures and standard for covered persons determinations. There you go. Whew. Yeah. But let's get into some interesting stuff, because we talked about ancient Rome for a second, but let's talk about the states. Okay? Because there's basically there's federal law, which supersedes state law. State law supersedes local laws. The Privileges and Immunities Clause from the U.S. Constitution prevents states from discriminating against people from other states. I'll say that again. The Privileges and Immunities Clause from the United States Constitution prevents states from discriminating against people from other states. The Articles... Hang on. The Articles of Confederation determines that we have the constitutional right to travel freely between states. So, this is related to 15-minute cities. Right? So, as they're trying to make it even more difficult and eliminate more and more of your freedom, remember the Articles of Confederation and how...
Hey, Roscoe.
It says that we can travel freely between states without scrutiny.
I'll give you an example. So, we know Illinois, especially Chicago, has very strict gun laws, right? So, suppose I'm driving from, what's on the other side, Wisconsin? So, you're driving from Wisconsin to Iowa, and you have a gun in your car. The law states, this is a federal law, if you're passing through that state, you can't get in trouble for it.
Say that again for the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're passing through a state those harsh gun laws, like if you get pulled over in Chicago, but you're driving to a state on the other side, you shouldn't be charged. Now, if your destination is Chicago, Illinois, then you're subject to their rules. So if I'm driving, because I live in Omaha, from Omaha to Chicago, those gun laws apply. Now, for the record, they've changed some of their laws recently. They have a concealed carry about 4 years ago, yada yada yada. But I'm just saying, before that, they were doing the New York shit. If you showed up in there and you had a gun on you, you would be charged. So they have a federal law that states if you're passing through that state, you can't get in trouble for that. But if your destination is that state, then you're subject to whatever laws they have on the books or whatever that city has on the books. That's why what my brother was telling you about you shouldn't be harassed and you can pass from state to state.
The Articles of Confederation.
Yes. So that's there. We don't know that these laws are out there to protect us.
You need to know this. That's why we're talking about this.
That's my next statement. There's a bodyguard on YouTube. He was on one of these shows, and they're asking him questions, and he's explaining to when it comes to gun laws. They're like, hey, he said, no, you can't just carry. Your concealed carry is honored in certain states. But what happens when you go to a state that doesn't honor your concealed carry, or they have different laws? That's your ass. You have to make yourself familiar with those laws as you travel. So that's why I said it matters what state you're going to. My concealed carry is good in like 37 states, and then I also got I got one for Utah, which adds another like 14 states to it. So I'm like good in a bunch of states. But at the time, when me and my wife were traveling, I wasn't good in Alabama. I was good in Louisiana where we were going, but I wasn't good in Alabama. But since I was passing through, going from Tennessee through Alabama to I was good. Then a short time later, they started honoring our. But these are the kind of laws that we're talking about. And also, we don't understand. You've always said it. We've always said freedom ain't free. So we don't really understand all these different things that are in place for us to have freedom and be able to do stuff. And this whole experiment for this shit to work. But on the flip side, all they got to do is try to hit you with this fake logic, this fake news, this fake bullshit, and then you'll give up your rights because you didn't realize that you even had that right. Or you're like, you know what? I don't own a gun, so this doesn't apply to me. That kind of shit. I remember, the pastor of my church, his son, and I remember he was explaining to me. He's like, I'm not for guns for myself, but I'm not against guns for everybody else. That makes no sense. And he told me several examples of people who were in the church.
It just said it's not his personal preference. He prefers not to carry a gun, but he's cool with everybody else carrying guns. No, exactly. But we've got away from that. Is the point I was making. Back in the day, you could disagree with somebody and still love them and like them, and you're not a bad person. Nowadays, I hate you.
You have a bullet in your pocket? Oh my fucking Lord! Like, no, this is a little vibrator. Oh, my bad. Disregard. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? But
dude, I remember I came to visit you one time, and we went to the gun range, and I had some bullets, and I had some bullets left over from that day we were shooting, and I put them in my suitcase, and I was on my way to the fucking airport, and I was like, oh no, I got bullets in my bag, dude. This is my carry-on too. I was like, no.
I was gonna say, did you check your bag? Yep. If you check your bag, you cool. But if it's your carry-on, they're gonna talk to you.
Dang,
I've been through it.
I had to get rid of them. I was like, nope. So, but check it out. The reason why I brought up the Privileges and Immunities Clause from the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation that determines you can't be discriminated against and allows you to travel freely from state to state. During the early days of the pandemic, Rhode Island was turning back cars entering the state with license plates from other states. That was challenged. That was challenged. The federal government said, hey, you can't do that. You cannot do that because that goes against the Articles of the Confederation. So they were trying that shit. The governor told the state troops, hey, turn back anybody from New York, anybody from surrounding states, we're closing the doors. And a person would think, well, hold on. Can the governor do that? Because that's you're entering into a war with the federal government or other states if you do that shit. So that's against the law.
That's a confederacy. That's a civil war. You can start. Right. Another state can start. Even right now, these whole abortion rights. Remember, some states you can have abortion, some states you can't. They're trying to say, well, you can't go to another state and do that. That actually goes against that. I'll give you another example in my personal life. it's really important where you claim that you live, because even when you deal with cities, so if I don't live in this city, I don't have to go by their laws. I had a problem. My youngest stepdaughter. So she found out, like I told you before, that if you're in foster care, you get paid, or you'll get a bunch of money, or they'll get you a car and all this other bullshit. And so she decided that she wanted to go stay with somebody else. So she was at Bellevue East West, one of these schools, Bellevue something or other. But I don't live in Bellevue, and and she was in foster care at the time, but we still had school rights. So she thought that this would be a good way for her to get a car. She decides to tell them, hey, I don't trust my parents. I don't trust my stepdad. He might hurt my daughter. She told these people that. So I'm going to pick her up, and all of a sudden they start acting crazy, weird towards me, all this and another. And I realized what was going on. I'm like, okay, I got this. So I called, they have what's called a guardian ad litem, which is a lawyer. I called him, let him know what was going on. And he was like, I'm like, look, I said, they're not coming to my house, but if they decide to come to my house, you better let these people know I'm a Second Amendment guy. I'm going to screw them up. But I also realized that, okay, that they're trying to circle the wagons, even though they let me pick my daughter up. But if I go back there tomorrow, they're going to kind of try something, right? So immediately I told my wife, hey, you still got education rights. Transfer to a different school in our jurisdiction right now. Now, let me explain the point of that story. I don't live in that city of Bellevue. They can't tell me what to do. I live in a different city. Now, if I go back into that border of Bellevue, yeah, I would have been arrested, all because of a story. But since I knew that, I'm not going back over there. I'm not a citizen of Bellevue. So I don't. Those jurisdictions, those rules stop in that city, and we see it all the time. The laws of this city don't apply to the next city. That's what you had just described. Roscoe just told y'all, if you don't live in that city, then you don't have to abide by those laws. But also, those Articles of Confederation gives us the ability to pass through those different areas. Down south, they got dry counties. Now, if you have alcohol in your car and you're passing through, cool. But if you bring alcohol into that dry county, your ass, it's just like having marijuana, heroin, or anything else. That shit is illegal in that particular county or that municipality. These are the laws, but we don't look at them like that. We were kids. Remember, we used to watch Dukes of Hazzard. Hey, we gonna get to the county line. Once we get to the county line, they can't follow us because what we were doing is illegal in this county, but what we're doing is not illegal in the next county. So now you can't follow me over there and enforce whatever stupid law that is. This is the shit that we don't understand as black folks. It's just folks in general. We trust law enforcement way too much. We trust them to be honest, and they're not always honest.
So the other thing about the states that you should know more about is the state governor is the head and chief of the National Guard. And
the national what?
Of the state National Guard.
Okay.
Every state has an emergency operations center, and there is a command and control structure. State governors actually rehearse for natural disasters, terrorist attacks, and enemy invasions. They rehearse this stuff. So if you look at it, the state governor is like a baby president.
Yes.
It's like a micro president of the United States. And it mirrors a lot of the president's functions on the state level. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I used to work in a federal building that had the FEMA headquarters at the top floor. And you walk into that office, man, and it was like the deck of Battlestar Galactica. Like, it was crazy. Maps everywhere, screens, topographical, weird looking maps you've never seen before. So if a state makes a state of emergency declaration, federal dollars are released to support the state's recovery efforts that FEMA assists with.
That's why you always hear, is the governor going to send in the National Guard? Because the National Guard is national, but there's a National Guard station in every state. They're stationed there. And so that's why it's kind of uneasy. because they're like, are we gonna give you federal funds for this? But that governor can send in that National Guard whenever he needs to. Like, and the National Guard ain't just it ain't just shooting people. It could be anything from, like, okay, we got flooding over here. We need them to come in and put up some sandbags, and National Guard it's just that military wing, that national military wing is placed in every state.
The governor's authority can be challenged in the state court. In New Hampshire, the governor was challenged in 2021 on his ability to limit large gatherings during the pandemic lockdown. The governor won, and the state allowed the governor to continue to shut down large gatherings and protests. So, really, what this is almost a type, I can't say fascism because it's not businesses, but it's a type of like micro dictatorship.
Yeah.
And this governor can shut down protests and large gatherings, even though that's our right, constitutional right on a federal level. So then that's why this governor in New Hampshire was taken to court for this. So people forget, though, that for justice to work, you got to show up. And
you got to participate.
You have to participate, and you have to be active. And really, man, like, you cannot be asleep on shit like this, because you're actually doing a disservice to your ancestors who fought for you to be a participant in such a society. And so by learning about the laws that have been established and how they're being manipulated by forces inside the government, you have to stay on it, man. I mean, and it's not a lot of work, actually. It's just paying attention, being attentive, being aware of your surroundings. You might be in a laundromat, or you might be in a bar and you see like a blurb on the TV and you're like, what? Hold on. They extended or got rid of what? You have to be aware of these things, man, because it will pass right by you. And, you can't rely on Twitter or social media to keep you up on this stuff.
To educate you correctly.
I mean, especially not social media, man. I mean, considering now that these platforms are shadow banning and silencing dissent,
I think it's crazy how much information. The reason I don't talk about some things is because I don't want them to shut it down. But it's crazy how much information, historical information, is slipping through the cracks now, and it goes through. But because the powers that be don't realize what it is. You know what I'm saying? Since if they knew how much information was really getting out, they would probably stop that too. So that's why I don't talk about a lot of stuff. Why I don't talk about, like me and you will talk in private, but again, let's talk about that. Let's not talk about that on the air. We don't want to give these motherfuckers a clue what's really going on. But it's crazy that a lot of old information, stuff that me and you read about in high school or in college 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 26 years ago, is now creeping out. There's a guy that me and you just talked about, Steve Coakley. He's a real one. Talks about a lot of different information. That stuff is the kind of stuff that's creeping out.
But part of the reason that he has an edge, or had an edge on politics, because he worked from inside the machine, and he worked for the mayor's office in Chicago.
Yep. And at one point he said, "Fuck it," he didn't agree with this shit no more. And he just started telling people the truth. Like, look, and he would tell you where to find it. Like, what books? He's like, hey, you need to read this book, and this book. On this page through, 497 through 426 or whatever, or 526. Read those pages. That relates to this. And he was brilliant when it came to that. And even though he's passed, his stuff is still relevant. You know what I'm saying? Like, literally, those videos are still relevant to this day. Those videos are very poignant. And some of the stuff we went through recently, he was right about. He was 100% right about.
So you got to understand how he got his start. He got his start on the college circuit, the black college circuit. He would go around speaking at black colleges. And so I think me and Duct Tape were in high school, and Duct Tape, he was like, "Yo, I got this VHS tape, man, from this black college," and this dude is talking some crazy shit in there. I'm like, "Okay, let's watch it." And so I watch it, and I'm like, "Oh, this lines
Real.
up with everything that I have been talking about beforehand." So up until that point, I was a leaf in the wind regarding agendas, like researching agendas and finding out information, because at that time in the early to mid 90s, this information was restricted to black bookstores and
Yep.
white fringe bookstores, because
Like,
it was hard to find this type of information, because what you wound up doing is it became an aggregate. You would get it from different sources. You had to go and you had to go to college bookstores and get these books. You had to go and
every
find.
once in a while, you would like something like 2020 would have an article about something like, "See, I told you."
Yeah, but it was
Or
coming from disparate places though, because
yeah, yep.
there were news articles that would like get through, but they would always be on page 7 of the local section. And I was
Yeah.
working some bullshit job, and I was in the break room, and that's when I saw this Newsweek article, not Newsweek, it was a USA Today article on how Operation Sea Spray was a continuation of these experiments that were happening in St. Louis when the U.S. Army biological warfare, or before they had a biological warfare unit,
They sprayed on their own citizens in St. Louis.
they
Yeah.
would actually put it on. They would go on top of schools, and they would
Ooh.
dump it on school kids, and then they would go on top of buildings downtown and dump it on people walking through downtown, and just monitor those people and see what happened to them. So this information, you would get it from different places, and like you would like put it all together, like on your desk or on a wall, and it was like the whole yarn tying this together, and that it was just like that. And then Coast to Coast AM and Art
Oh yeah,
Bell came around,
Art Bell.
and
Yeah.
man,
Well,
I told
he
Duct
was
Tape, I
always
was like, bro, you got to
he,
listen to this show.
he was always around though. He didn't come around. He had been around.
Yeah,
We were just too young to
but
understand.
see, I was the guy though. Like in my circle, I was the guy. I was the guy that
Yep,
was like,
yep.
"Yo, my man, you need to read this book." Why?
So
Because I said, "Hold on, why?" Because there is some heavy duty shit coming, and you have to be ready for it. Why?
look,
Do you want to be a slave, bro?
look. Once you read it, then you get it. But that was the whole deal. We had a couple episodes about Behold a Pale Horse. That's one of these books.
I was taking that book around and spreading the Behold a Pale Horse gospel to everybody.
He was a Jehovah's Witness.
Listen,
Have you heard about? Well, I can't think of his name. Bill whatever. Have you heard
Bill
of Bill
Cooper. Yeah,
Bill
he's
Cooper?
joking when he says Jehovah's Witness, but he's using that as an analogy. So,
Knocking on
but
people's
what's
doors and
crazy,
shit.
I would come around with this book that had this biblical looking image painting on the front, and it had this fold out diorama map diagram in the back of it that showed the breakdown of power from the very top to the very bottom, local level. And it would fuck people up. They'd be like, "What? This person is involved in this shit?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's that fucking serious." And then what happened at that point is that these dudes in the blue and gray with the magic decoder rings and the secret handshakes,
Two
and
dudes.
the
Two
dudes
dudes.
with the maroon hats with the tassels you would see with a little kid on their shoulder, you start to figure out who these weird, creepy, mysterious dudes really are and what they're attached to, and no, they're not the ones calling the shots. They're just part of it.
Look, like when you first crack over the book, like page 63, we talked about Lodge P4 in the Vatican. Is also it would just blow your mind because
And then you're like, how is this related to JFK? What?
how? And so yeah, that shit blows your fucking mind. But it was one of these things. Like, so it was very difficult to get any kind of confirmation on what we were talking about or what we were learning.
Man, and then when you got the confirmation, I'm like,
yeah,
okay, I am not a crazy person. This shit is real. It's just the problem is next to nobody is talking about this in the mainstream public purview.
Like, first things first, it wasn't okay, but it was one of these things where, okay, I see where this is going. I understand who I can talk to about this. And the thing is, you had to let people get introduced to it on their own. Then they would come to you and ask you a question.
If you walk into a black bookstore and you just happen to like walk past an aisle and you hear two brothers talking about two dudes, this shit is normal. Is in a black bookstore, that's normal talk. Because of oppression, you become suspicious of everybody.
Okay. Come on, hold it. Okay, I'm gonna take it there.
Here's a baton, motherfucker, run.
It's a couple of older white guys that I work with. One is retired now, the other one still works there. But he's dated a couple of black ladies or whatever. He would ask me, how come black people? He didn't say believe conspiracy theories. How come black people are so much much more understanding of conspiracies? I'm like, because we've been oppressed. We're told that racism doesn't exist. We're told, but then you get beat up by a cop, or then you got, and you would have these conversations. And he was like, "Hey, I read this," and I'm like, "Yep, go here." And he was an early listener to our show, and we would talk about that kind of stuff. And you're like, when your black experience, that is part of it. That is part of it. So when we're reading these books, but you can't find it too much mainstream media. You might find one or two articles that relate to it, but you can't find anything to confirm it. Or another book will pop out. But then you have Steve Coakley who's telling you these boule motherfuckers are everywhere. And then you have Steve Coakley telling you that this, and this. And Spiro Agnew, read his book, and he was explaining how look, when they want to buy you off, they'll. So say you put out your autobiography, but they don't want to give you a check and bribe you. They'll buy up all the copies. Like, look, here's a check for all the copies of your book. We don't want this book out. He's breaking this shit down, and you're like, nah, because that's not what we were taught in grade school. That's not what we were taught growing up watching these sitcoms. That's not. And so then you start like, okay, the episode of Barney Miller where I sent you the video, which is Barney Miller, and for the user who aren't old enough.
Yes, it's a cop show. Yeah.
But there's a whole like 5-minute blurb about the Trilateral Commission. Again, Coakley taught us about that. So when you realize this show from the 70s was talking about that shit, then you're like, man, that motherfucker was right. Coakley was right. That's the shit. They toss little shit here and there, but the truth is, as a black person, you live in a conspiracy. And I'll use the word theory because ain't no motherfucking theories involved. You live in a conspiracy. Who you are you've been lied to about it. How many of us are Native Americans? How many of us are Aboriginal?
Then when you see that, they are planning to do to the rest of the world what they have already done to black people.
Done to us.
And then when you live, you see this in your very early adult life. And then you see this slowly manifest throughout time with the opioid crisis and the lockdowns and all these
how about this? When they took over, took over the black church, they took over the black church by giving it that government money. Because back in the day, we all know the black church is the one who funded the civil rights movement. The black church is the one who properly educated you so you would understand who you were. Even Malcolm, when he talks about that speech, we were already over. He's breaking it down like we were already here. You don't know who you are. You call yourself African American. You don't realize you were already here. That shit. You know what I'm saying? And once you realize that it's a facade, it's a game, it's a movie set, and nobody yelled cut. Once you start realizing that, then of course you'll start to read other stuff. And sometimes it is kind of hard to discern what's legit, what's not. But one thing, what they're telling you ain't true. That's all you could. I know I'm being lied to, but I don't know how many people are in on it. Or I'm being lied to by 3 or 4 different people, but I'm being lied to. That's all I can tell you. And so that's when you start to pull away. You start to figure stuff out. You start to go to other sources of information. You start to ask your elders, like, hey, what was this really like? And when I remember one time I was at a barbershop and an old head was breaking down the whole Martin Luther King. He said, man, Martin Luther King was full of shit. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, we're taught he's a great, yeah, But that speech, he gave that speech 7 times before that. The I Have a Dream speech, he did that by heart. Because he's saying like my grandmother and my mother, they heard him say that speech in Alabama 2 or 3 times before that. He didn't just pull that out of his ass. You
No, that was a
realize that
bit. It was a bit. You know what I'm
it was a
saying? And
bit.
he was
Yeah,
working. He
yeah.
was working the material, and then he did,
That,
and then he finally got his HBO special.
no, it was even deeper. Ballad of the Bullet. When you listen to that Malcolm X speech, everybody listens to the speech, but you got to listen to the end of the speech where he tells you them Abernathy and them niggas got millions of dollars from the Kennedys and this person and that person and all these people. It wasn't the Kennedys, but I'm just giving an example because he talks about that hotel where they had that meeting was part of his family's. But he breaks down the fact that these motherfuckers were funded by the white establishment, and that they co-opted the March on Washington. The March on Washington was going to be a takeover, but they co-opted it and started, hey, they got it under control, and that kind of shit. So when you start to learn this stuff and realize like it's not, this guy ain't who I thought he was. Now, King changed his whole narrative later on in life. We know that, and that's probably what got his ass killed. Because we know Lee Harvey, whatever, Earl Ray, whatever, didn't do the shooting. We know this. He was exonerated of that.
James Earl Ray.
So, yeah, James Earl Ray, that is correct. We know that he was exonerated, and the King family sued and all this other stuff. But the whole point is what we're told in school when you're in second, third, and fourth, fifth grade ain't what really happened. And so you got to unlearn that shit. You got to wash the brainwashing off. You know what I'm saying? So that's why it's important to understand that this whole show was about losing your rights, suspending your rights, about giving your rights up for this, that, and the other, willfully giving your rights up. No, you should be fighting for those. I do realize that. I think it was Ron Paul, the older one. He said, "Look, school shootings, mass shootings are terrible, but it's even worse to give up your gun rights, because without those gun rights, you can't stop that cop from coming in your house. Without those guns, you can't stop the Klan from burning that cross in your yard. And you got to remember that those Klansmen that wore them hoods, they were police officers, they were governors, they were mayors, lawyers, and all that other shit. They were fine, upstanding citizens. So you need that gun to protect you. They don't tell you the stories of black folks rising up and shooting them motherfuckers. There's that one where the Native Americans, where the Klan had took over this one town, and they're going to have a rally on public land, and the Native Americans showed up. And the black folks said, "Hey, you need our help?" Native Americans said, "Nah, we good." And they go in there and they regulate, beat the fuck out of it. When you see these pictures of these Native American vets and they're wearing a KKK flag on their back, that's because they beat the fuck out the motherfuckers. But they don't tell you them stories.
They wearing it like a trophy.
Yes, like the motherfuckers weren't members. They were letting you know, like, hey, them Klan motherfuckers don't come around. Because even today, the media is permeating the thought that the Klan is some all-encompassing shit. Like I told you, I don't like that Kamal dude, because he's like, yeah, man, I went to go interview a Klan. I was terrified. Nigga, you a pussy, and you shouldn't have been there, motherfucker, if you couldn't take the heat. Because if I know one thing, if me and you was around the Klan, they ain't fucking with us.
No. I'm
not getting lynched. I'm taking 4 or 5 of them motherfuckers with me, whether with my gun or my bare hands. Them niggas ain't making it. You know what I'm saying? But they still, to this day, you watch a movie like A Time to Kill, they're racist Klan members, or they're scaring you. To this day, that is a fucking psyop, as you put it, my brother. And they still try to give you this idea that these motherfuckers have power that they didn't have. And they have you thinking that your ancestors are scared, because you hear niggas to this day, I ain't my ancestors. Your ancestors were way harder than you, bitch. Shut the fuck up. Your grandmother was beating ass. How many of these sisters you see them with guns in their hands shooting the motherfucker? Or that one when them 3 cops was at that black woman's face about to beat her ass, and she lit a cigarette in their face and blew smoke at them. We were not these timid, scared people. That is the psyop. And a lot of us, because we thought we were smart, we gave up our rights. That's why this is a cautionary tale. We're warning you. Poor white people, don't give up your rights. Because that's the only thing saving you from this fucking machine of government and oppression. And whether it's the Illuminati or whether it's the Rothschilds or who the fuck ever. Yeah, they controlling y'all. Don't get it twisted. It's not right. Don't get that shit up.
So 15-minute cities are something people are talking about now. When you go to 15minutecity.com and you go to About, it says Everyone living in the city should have access to essential urban services within a 15-minute walk or bike. He noticed it said walk or bike. The 15-minute city project is designed to help access focused urban transformations be what we need them to be: ambitious, inclusive, measurable, and effectively implemented. So
that goes against the Articles of Confederation, what you just talked about.
okay,
They don't want you moving freely, my nigga.
and the smart cities, what a smart city was, they failed because there was so much pushback. People are like, "Yo, you're not going to corral us into cages and use all the data that you get from us to make money off of it." A smart city,
these are jails without walls. That's all they is.
right?
A jail without walls.
But it has barcodes. So a smart city is a technologically modern urban area that uses electronic methods and sensors to collect specific data to manage assets, resources, and services efficiently. The collected data is used to improve operations across the city. Residents and city workers may be provided with the apps that allow them to access city services, receive and issue reports of outages, accidents, crimes, pay taxes, fees, and the like. Hey, listen, man. You ever tried calling Cash App's customer support? You can't. You can only fucking message them. So now you're telling me that I can't call the water department and talk to them on the phone? I can't get the electrical company on the phone? I got to use an app that only allows me to message? Fuck
So
off.
that means if you don't have internet, if you don't have all this modern bullshit,
Then you cannot
don't exist.
access these services. These civil services will not be out of your reach if you don't have internet access. Okay, well then I just got to charge my smart car. You can't charge your car today, your electric car today, because the utilities are using so much of the grid that we can't afford to have anybody charge their car, so nobody can drive today. What the fuck are you talking about? Nobody can drive. This is America, motherfucker. I can go state to state if I fucking feel like it. No, not today. So because of Presidential Emergency Act, nobody can leave the state. So you telling me we're under martial law? No. What we've curated a bespoke experience for you, and all you have to do is use the app, and you can have food delivered to your door. Hey, I don't want none of that shit. I want to go to the mountains right now. Well, you can't do that because you can't use your electric car, and the charging stations are all have been turned off. Why have they been turned off? Because they're overload the grid. Whoa.
Whoa. What about the fact they can shut that electric car off whenever they want? They can send a signal from Tesla to your car. You know what?
Right. But you want to tell me this 15-minute city is great. No, this is a rehashed version of the smart city. But see, what's funny about this... I don't
ask permission to go anywhere.
Okay, but see, what's funny about this, though, I don't need anybody's... I'm an adult. I can go where the fuck I feel like. Shit, when I was a kid, I'd just get on my bike and go, as long as I, have my parents' permission. But listen, nothing is being done. There's no encouragement to get small shops and businesses to open in these residential areas where they want to create these 15-minute cities. Areas 20, 30, 40 years ago would have been fine, but they're closed due to lack of business and the high costs. See, what they're doing is they're telling you this is going to work, but they're not factoring in economy with this shit. Unless you're going to just wipe that out, and then everything is going to be, you get this natural, this fucking stipend of like $1,000 a month that you're supposed to live on. Yeah, yeah. Then it's fine. A 15-minute city works if nobody works anywhere. And everybody's given like a stipend to live on, and then you just wind up like that TV show The Silo. Then there's a limit on who can procreate and who can't. Dude, there are no tax breaks, no financial incentives to bring these smart cities or 15-minute cities into fruition. But it's fine though, because people will be pushed into these situations until they realize that you have been corralled.
But by then it's going to be too late. Like I told you, once you lose rights, it's impossible to get the motherfuckers back. We would have fucked around to start all over. The fact is this. I get it. It's one thing when you choose not to go somewhere, but it's another thing when you're told you can't go somewhere. And that's what's happening right now. And they disguise it as in, this is what they do in Europe. They disguise it as in, we'll take care of you. Disguise it as in, look, whenever you watch these dystopian movies Like, there's a little bit of truth in that shit. I'm gonna give you an example. Not the Demolition Man. I said Running Man. Demolition Man. Remember there were all 3 or 4 different things that we all laughed about. But who you know the answer. Who won the restaurant wars in Demolition Man?
Oh, Taco
Bell. Taco Bell was the only restaurant. And so they would go into motherfucking, it was like a fine dining place, but it was Taco Bell. But that's what's coming. Like, they'll
and the homeless people would appear from underground at nighttime and
eat rats and shit.
And demolish the Taco Bell and steal the fake food.
So that's what they would prepare us for this bullshit by showing these movies. That for us, that was entertainment. But if you pay attention, that's what right now, motherfuckers going out of business all the time. Different retailers going out of business. There's no more JCPenney's. All this shit's going out of business, and you're gonna fuck around. Walmart and Home Depot will be the only ones left.
That's the problem. Is that these smaller businesses have been pushed out during the pandemic, and they weren't allowed to stay open, and they lost their fucking shirt. And now you're trying to like restart another business, and the operating cost is so fucking high for you to set it off again after you've lost everything. And so now you have in these neighborhoods all these large, big box stores and corporations like, okay, well, I need some coffee. Well, you can go to Starbucks. I need some clothes. Well, you can go to Target. I need a chainsaw. Well, you can go to Home Depot. And these big box stores, man, these large corporations, and you want to do a 15-minute city with no small businesses? Are you fucking insane? Dude, as I said a second ago, the only way that's going to work is if people can't work or don't work anymore. And it's communism, and everything just given to you.
It's a bunch of isms, a whole bunch of isms. So,
yep. But that's why it's important to read up on things like emergency powers and these presidential, these emergency declarations and presidential powers and all these things. Dude,
look, we saw it in Star Wars, Attack of the Clones, Clone War. The Senate gave power to Palpatine. Mm-hmm. And then he became the emperor.
That's how you wind up with Darth Vader.
Exactly. That's how. Because the Senate gave them power, emergency power. He was trusted. Politicians is full of shit. So he was trusted. They gave him the power, and he never gave it back.
Right.
Pay attention. These movies, they're entertainment, but they're also warnings because most of those movies are actually based on historical things that took place. We just talked about that shit with Rome. We just talked about that shit with the Greeks and the Romans and shit where the Senate gave emergency power to somebody, and next thing you know, that motherfucker didn't give it back.
Yeah,
it's real. This is history, and if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. That's all.
Know your rights. That's all I got. We out. Peace.
Holla back.